Hello, everyone. To those I haven't met yet, my name is Kelsey Erickson Streufert. I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Texas Restaurant Association. Very excited to be joined by Chief Swenson today with the TABC. We're going to ask him to kind of introduce himself in a minute, but first, just a couple of housekeeping items. First, this webinar really is meant to be an educational resource, a proactive chance for us to all talk about a really important topic and how we can all do our part to stop human trafficking in Texas. We're not going to be able to comment on any sort of specific cases or allegations or anything like that. This really is just meant to be a general guide and resource. Also, if we have any members of the media present, you're welcome to reach out to us through our press contacts. But again, this isn't really the forum for sort of media interviews. It's really meant to be an educational resource. We do want to make this interactive. So if you have questions, if you have comments, or something that you'd like to address, please just type us a note in the chat or Q&A, and we will be monitoring that as we go. We're also recording, so if you missed something or want to share this with a friend or colleague, we will be happy to make it available for you. Just send us a note. So with all that, I think that was the key housekeeping items. Chief Swenson, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to introduce yourself. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelsey. I appreciate the invite, and can you hear me okay, Kelsey? Okay, good deal. My name, as was said, I'm Ron Swenson. I'm the chief of our enforcement division. I'm fairly new to this role as the chief of the entire enforcement division. I've been here about 4 or 5 months, but I'm not new to TABC. I've been with TABC for a little over 19 years, going on 20. Prior to this position, I ran our special investigations division and then our investigations bureau. So about 10 years ago, TABC took a more focused effort into looking at organized crime as it relates to the alcoholic beverage industry, and placed some resources into different task forces, and gave them a little more flexibility and ability, and applied more resources to those teams to be able to concentrate on these types of investigations: human trafficking, organized crime, etc. So obviously it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and I'm going to talk about some of the purposes and reasons why TABC is involved in human trafficking, give a couple of case studies, and hopefully the goal is really just to provide an understanding so that as the Restaurant Association and its members and anybody else that's listening can have a better understanding of, one, how to identify human trafficking, and two, how to report it if you think it is occurring, because it's not an obvious crime. Most crimes, having been in law enforcement almost 30 years, most crimes are pretty, either you did it or you didn't do it. Human trafficking is by far one of the most difficult crimes to prove, and it's because it's a victim-based that a lot of the victims don't self-identify or see themselves as victims. So we'll go over some of that today on how you as business owners can possibly identify that, and then give you the resources to report it so that the appropriate agencies like TABC, but many other agencies, can start investigating it and hopefully take these people out of that environment. So subject to any questions, if we can start the first slide. There we go. So how to identify and report human trafficking? Next slide, please. So in Texas, we like to, well, not just in Texas, I think everybody refers to it as modern day slavery. I like to talk about modern day slavery is, it's been around since mankind began, right? Are we ever going to completely eradicate it, eliminate it? Probably not. But can we make a difference in Texas? Can we make a difference in the alcoholic beverage industry? Absolutely. And that's what our focus is here, is the Texas related businesses and making a difference in the lives of Texas citizens. So there's really two types of human trafficking. There's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. If you wanted to dive down a little further into that, you have international trafficking, domestic trafficking, adult trafficking, minor trafficking, all subgroups of sex and labor trafficking. So We see a lot of in Texas, and especially in the different bars and restaurants that we regulate, is a lot of international trafficking, people being brought in internationally and then forced to pay off a fee. And when they're forced to pay off that fee, a lot of times they don't have the money, so they end up working in our bars and restaurants. So that's, you're going to see a case study on that. And that's a lot of what we see as TABC investigators. Um, Texas is number 2 for reported cases in the US, I think only second to California. That doesn't surprise me. We're a big state and we have a lot of sea borders and land borders. So and several of the largest cities within the United States. So as sad as that is, that's not a statistic that we are proud of, but to be honest, it does not surprise me. And the victims can be anybody. We predominantly see mostly females because it's usually in a cantina setting but that's for TABC because we're regulating an industry. But it can be males, minors, non-citizens, and of course, citizens. We do see a lot of domestic trafficking, runaways that are taken and then put into sexually oriented businesses and things of that nature, and then pimped or trafficked out of those establishments. 300,000 plus estimated victims in Texas. I mean, that's a pretty daunting number and something that's kind of scary. So next slide, please. So what is TABC's role? Well, a few sessions ago, we were given specific legislative funding to help to make human trafficking one of our primary focuses. And it wasn't just us. Several other state agencies were given funding because of it. It's always been a focus, but it became more of a focus after some investigations. So some of these numbers you're going to see, it looks like we have really broken into something that maybe didn't exist before. I think it's because we applied extra resources to those investigations that now we're finding that it's more prolific than what we had thought it was. But it occurs in hotels, restaurants, bars, and places that sell alcohol. We regulate the majority of bars, unless they're unlicensed, and even those we have an interest in because if they're selling without a permit, et cetera. Restaurants and hotels, motels, a lot of those have alcohol restaurants in there. So that's why TABC got involved in there. Is a significant amount of the locations that we regulate have been found to have human trafficking occurring. And we regulate over 60,000 businesses in Texas. And I'd like to say that 99% of those businesses are good businesses. So I'm sure everybody on here today is a good business. I don't think the bad guys are sitting there logging in to watch this. But there is, out of that 60,000, there is enough criminal activity going on inside locations that we regulate to keep us really busy. So we're trying to focus our efforts really on those bad actors and then find ways to regulate the industry as least intrusive as possible and focus our efforts on those bad actors. Now, like I said, there's enough out there that it does keep us extremely busy. One of the unique things that TABC has is we have the authority to inspect a licensed business at any time. That's something that most agencies don't realize, that we have that unique authority, and it's a very valuable tool. Now, I am careful. I always talk when we're presenting these courses at law enforcement, I'm very careful to describe the difference between an inspection and a search. If we have probable cause to believe that there is criminal activity afoot at a location, we will get a search warrant. So if you hear that TABC executed a search warrant, why did they do a search warrant? They have inspection authority. That's true, but we err on the side of caution. And if we have that probable cause, we still follow the typical law enforcement investigative methods of getting search warrants or grand jury subpoenas, et cetera. But our authority is something that gives us the right to just go in there. We get a tip, we get and somebody calls us and doesn't give us a lot of actionable intelligence. We can still go in there and do this inspection to check and verify whether it's true or not true. And that's a very powerful tool and part of the reason why the legislature thought that it would be a good idea for us to take an extra look and make sure that when we're regulating these establishments, that we're focused on human trafficking offenses also. Next slide, please. So this is one of the case studies. I'm really proud of this case. And in fact, it was the FBI came in and did superseding indictments on Rita and her son. This was a bar down in Mission, Texas. We actually got a tip from a non-governmental organization, an NGO, if anybody's familiar with it. It was, I'm proud to say their name a lot, Refugee Services of Texas. They called us and basically said that they had some victims that had come forward and were asking for services. And through the services, they were talking about how they ended up working at this bar and how they were trafficked. And they asked us, the NGO asked if we would be interested in investigating it. And of course, we said, absolutely, we're very interested. And we opened an investigation, ran into a lot of hurdles with this because there was some statute of limitations problems. Rita had been doing this for many, many years. So a lot of the information we had the statute of limitations had passed. So we had to find unique ways. We worked with the border prosecutor uh, down in Hidalgo County. He was invaluable to our success as he was able to find ways that we were able to still charge Rita and her son with aggravated sexual abuse of children. We did get a couple of actual human trafficking criminal charges put on them. We work closely with Hidalgo County, Hidalgo County's DA's office, and got her indicted on, I'm not sure if it says on this slide, but over 20 felony indictments. I believe he was indicted on 6 or more. What was unique about it, and what happens a lot with these human trafficking cases, especially international trafficking, which is what this investigation was it spiderwebbed. So we started off with 4 to 7 victims, and it spiderwebbed into, I think there's about 40 victims, because for every victim we would interview, they would tell us about another girl that was there. We would track that down, and it just kept spiderwebbing and spiderwebbing. Well, it became where we were actually working with FBI attaches in Mexico. It had victims that were up in Chicago and Houston, and it became an international investigation. So the FBI came in and we had a couple of our special investigators that were on a task force, and the FBI came in and did superseding indictments on Rita and her son. And that was hugely successful to have them come in and do those superseding indictments, because it gave us additional resources that TABC normally wouldn't have. And we were able to reach out, like I said, to our counterparts in Mexico and other states. And it was really beneficial tracking down a lot of the other victims. And I'm really proud. I just attended her federal sentencing, where she was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. He was very cooperative and helped rescue some other victims, and really even testified against his mother. So he was given a reduced sentence of 6 years. And but really happy with that conviction. They probably two of the worst. Well, her definitely was one of the worst people I've ever had to. I didn't directly investigate it, but just reading some of the reports, some of the things that she did to these victims was just really horrific. And she did use force a lot of, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. A lot of times they're not using force anymore, literally locking people up. A lot of it's just coercion. They're taking their documents. They're threatening to have their family members in Mexico killed. It's a lot of force and fraud and coercion, not a lot of force. I'm sorry, it's for fraud and coercion, not a lot of physical force. But Rita did use force, and her son was kind of the muscle for that. He would beat up the girls. He would sexually abuse them, and it was a really one of the worst cases I've ever been involved in. She she had a couple of bars, and she was trafficking women through. And the way she would do it was, we call them fichetas. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a Spanish word for a token or bottle cap. And what we find a lot, and this is illegal under the Alcoholic Beverage Code, is that a lot of our undocumented immigrants who come across the border illegally into Texas, they're looking for jobs, obviously, and they need to pay off their coyote fee. They paid somebody to get them into the United States. And what happens is a lot of these bar owners like Rita will let them work at their bar if they do drink solicitation. And drink solicitation, as simple as I can put it, is when a female patron sits down with a female employee. I'm sorry, they are employees. They're usually contract. You're not going to find a lot of W-4 forms or W-2 forms for these girls that are working there, but they're taxi girls. And what they do is they do the drink solicitation. They sit down with the male customer and they order a drink. And the way the reason why they call them fichetas is they used to keep the bottle caps as a way to prove how many drinks they solicited throughout the night. So at the end of the night, they would turn in, 12, 15, 20 bottle caps, and that's how the girl was paid. And a percentage of that would go to pay off her coyote fee. So now they really don't do the bottle caps anymore. Usually they'll have a ledger behind the bar, which the bartender will track. But the girl will sit down and the male customer, has to buy her a drink. And for her drink, it's probably going to be $20 a drink, which is double or triple what it would be for the customer. And that's how they do the drink solicitation. That is illegal. It's a general penalty in the Alcoholic Beverage Code. And it's a cancelable offense if a location under TABC administrative rules, if we went after it, if they're allowing that drink solicitation. And it's because it's really a precursor to human trafficking. So when we go into a bar and we work it undercover, or we do an inspection and we see these fichetas working in these bars, we know that there's probably more afoot. Either the girls are involved also in prostitution or selling drugs, and the drink solicitation is usually one of the underlying offenses that usually they start with. And that's exactly what Rita was doing. She was bringing these girls in, having them do drink solicitation, and they would basically graduate to prostitution and selling drugs and things of that nature. And she was doing it for several years. As proud I am of this investigation. It's kind of sad that we missed it for nearly 15 years while she was operating down there in Mission, Texas. So an inevitable consequence for her. She will spend most likely the rest of her life in jail, which is a good spot for her. Another case that we had up in Irving, labor trafficking case where agents arrested an individual they observed forcing Cuban citizens. We find that a lot too. A lot of the times the nationalities will stay together. There'll be all Cuban women or all Central American, Mexican nationals that will be working together. A lot of our, as I said earlier, in our sexually oriented businesses, not all of them, but a few, that's usually where we'll find our runaways, underage girls that are working in there. A lot of times the establishments are unaware because some of these girls have really good false IDs, but some laws were changed a session or two ago to require e-verify, so that every girl or guy, I guess, if they were working there at a sexually oriented business, would have to do e-verify to verify their age. So that's one way that TABC was able to kind of affect some good law changes, was getting that e-verify law put into place to make sure that these establishments are verifying the age of their employees, make sure that they don't have underage runaway girls working in there. Next slide, please. So how can you help? Recognize and report. Be part of the solution. Recognize and report. We're not asking you, because it's such a great. I almost guarantee you, if you think somebody's a human trafficking, and for whatever reason you go up and you start talking, they are going to tell you they are not a victim. It takes multiple meetings with these victims to make them understand and see that they are being victimized. If you take a woman that just left Honduras or wherever she came from, or ran away from her abusive boyfriend, or ran away from her parents, or whatever happened, and she's making money now. Maybe she has a roof over her head, even if it's not a great roof. And a lot of times when we have our initial contact with those women, they do not see themselves as victims. And recently we hired 2 victim services coordinators, which has really been the groundbreaking area where they do such a good job. Having been a cop for nearly 30 years, I can tell you, I like to think I have a lot of empathy, but I'm probably lacking a little bit, especially when it comes to, going into these clubs at 2 in the morning, and it's, there's drugs and prostitution and all that stuff going on. Law enforcement is just not the best suited to be victim centric. But what we did is we self-recognize that, and I think a lot of law enforcement agencies have self-recognized that, and they brought in victim services coordinators who specialize in providing in follow-up exams, whether it's a SANE exam for sexual assault, or just psychological exams, or just getting them basic human needs, blankets, food, water, etc. And when you start doing that, you start building that relationship. And once that relationship is built, a lot of times they start talking and they start explaining what's happening to them, and they don't even realize that they're describing the exact offenses of human trafficking. So it takes a while, and that's why recognizing it is so important. One thing you'll see, some of the statistics we have here, 275% increase in reports to TABC. That's what I was talking about earlier. That went up. Is it an increase or did we always have it? I think it went up because we put a focus on it. And when you put a focus on anything, you're going to see an increase. But that's still important to understand that by us providing that focus on human trafficking, it increased our reports that came into TABC. So we're doing presentations like this, educating other law enforcement agencies, putting agents on our federal task forces has really increased our detection rate. As you can see, 646 HT related investigations. HT related, we're going to include prostitution, drink solicitation, because we know those can be precursors to human trafficking. 287 plus HT victims rescued and identified. We actually took a model from the FBI. And what they identified is when we talk to someone and they basically tell us all the signs, so we know they're a victim of human trafficking, but they won't identify. That's going to be they won't self-identify. They won't say, "Oh, I'm a victim." That's going to be an identified person. Rescued is they say, "Yes, I need help," and they accept our help, and we put them in with an NGO. We find them extra shelter. Uh, they they identify. We consider those rescued, where we actually pull them out and provide them services. Identified are the ones where we go in there and we can tell that they're most likely human trafficking victims, but they're just not self-identifying at that point. So that's how we differentiate between rescued and identified. 64 TABC actions against businesses. This is the unique authority that TABC has. So any law enforcement agency can go out there and conduct a human trafficking investigation. Not any law enforcement agency has that dual authority to do the criminal side, but also do the administrative side. So one of the best cases, I believe, one of the bullets that's on the side here, TABC cancel San Antonio club's liquor permit following charges of human trafficking. Well, what that was a sexually oriented business where Bexar County did the human trafficking investigation. We helped, but they identified a victim of human trafficking. She was a runaway, actually out of North Texas. The pimp, the trafficker, found her online and seduced her through social media, bought her a Greyhound bus ticket, bused her to San Antonio, and he treated her, like gold for the first week or two. And they were boyfriend, girlfriend, and then he basically said, "Hey, you're going to have to start earning your keep." So he put her to work in these sexually oriented businesses. She was not of age. She was 16, 15 initially, 16. I think she had her birthday while she was working at these clubs. He got her a fake ID, but it was not a good fake ID. And he did this with multiple girls, and he trafficked them out of multiple bars in San Antonio, Austin, and Houston. And Bexar County made the arrest on him for human trafficking. She was rescued, returned to her parents. I hate to say it, but I believe last I heard she ran away again and probably back in the game. But what we did, and this is where I'm really proud and where TABC is such a valuable resource for the industry, other law enforcement agencies, but we went in and we took administrative action against those clubs. Not only against the clubs, the administrative action, but we also made some arrests of the managers at these sexually oriented businesses for employment harmful to children. So although Bexar County handled the initial human trafficking case, we were able to come in and kind of treat the core problem, which was the establishments which were allowing this activity to take place. That's also where the E-Verify law came out of, and it resulted in some other statutory changes that is beneficial for us conducting investigations. So really proud of how TABC has the ability to really affect change and improve, the quality of life in a neighborhood by getting some bad actors either shut down or taking that administrative action. Because we can always take the bad guy off the street and put him in jail, but if we can go back to the establishment, because another bad guy will come in. So if we can go back to the establishment and truly either get them in compliance or put them out of business, whichever it is, it can really improve the quality of life for that neighborhood and that city. And I think that was really a good success in this case. Next slide, please. Again, human trafficking, modern day slavery, kind of what it is. What we talked about, this is controlled by violence, threat of force, or psychological coercion. In the penal code, they say force, fraud, or coercion. We see a lot of fraud and coercion now. We've debriefed a lot of these, debriefed a lot of these victims, and you're expecting to, you see some of the pictures, and you see some of the people chained up or on handcuffs and all that. And I'm not saying that never happened. Like in Rita's case, she actually had a room at one of her houses where she had the bars that normally would go on the outside of the window. She had them on the inside, and she kept people locked up. We don't see that very often. We don't see that much anymore. A lot of what we are seeing is the fraud and coercion. And we had a case here in Austin where a a gentleman was identified. I shouldn't even call him a gentleman. He was a trafficker, but he wasn't really trafficking the women. What he was doing was he was making a lot of money, and he was providing them room and board. And what he had done is he had subleased, and I'm just using rough math here, but he subleased 4 apartments in one apartment complex. So he had 4 apartments in his name in one apartment complex, which I don't think is allowed at most apartment complexes, but I don't think this was the greatest apartment complex in town. So he had 4 apartments there, and what he did, let's just for simple math, each apartment was $1,000 a month. So he would pay $4,000 a month to have these 4 apartments. Well, what he did was he put 4 women in one apartment, and he charged each one of them $1,000. So he was making $4,000 per apartment when it was only costing him. So he's making, what, I'm bad at math, 12, 16,000 a month, and it was only costing him 4,000 a month. So that's how he was using fraud to make these women feel like they were free. And it was a really difficult case for us, because when we were investigating, we would do surveillance, and we would try and set up on these women to see, are they being forced? Are they all being, are they under duress? Do they need to be rescued? And when you're doing surveillance, it looks like they're free to come, they're free to go, they're free to and then we go talk to them, and they basically, they're from Honduras or Mexico or whatever. And yeah, there's 4 women in a 1 bedroom apartment, and it's not the greatest living conditions, but it's all relative. And where they come from, this was great. They had running water, air conditioning, heating. Did they have to go work at a bar, every night of the week till 2 in the morning and do things they probably normally didn't want to do? Absolutely. A lot of them also were doing day jobs. They had day jobs where they were doing manual labor, painting, some cleaning and things like that in different hotels and at construction sites and things like that. So, but to them it was all relative. So when we approached them and we said, hey, we believe you all might be victims of human trafficking, they really had a difficult time. Some of them didn't. In fact, out of all of them, there was only a couple that had that eventually did admit to being victims. So that's something that is one of the most difficult things to prove when we're doing these investigations, is that, again, back to what I said at the very beginning, they do not view themselves as victims. And um, because of that fraud or coercion, and a lot of them then are threatened. They're told, that they don't go anywhere, don't trust the police, that you're going to be deported, etc. All of that is held over their head, and it makes them very untrusting and difficult as witnesses and as victims. So that's why it's such a hard crime to prove. They've lost free will movement. Sometimes that's true. Exploited economically. That's exactly what I'm talking about. These 4 women living in a 1 bedroom apartment, which should have only been $1,000, they're each paying, so they're paying quadruple for one apartment than what they really should have been doing. So they were being exploited for economically, paid nothing. They really don't get a salary. Like I said, you're not going to find your W-4, W-2 forms. They're not going to be on the Workforce Commission list. You'll find a ledger usually behind the counter with their stage name or their working name, and maybe some other identifiers that were maybe taken from them by the trafficker as they went to work in that location. I mean, traffic, like I talked about, labor, sex acts, other services, and again, traffic. This is always confusing. Everybody thinks trafficking, it has to do with. I was explaining this to my daughter, who was in middle school at the time, and she thought human trafficking had to do, with the freeway because it's traffic, right? Has nothing to do with movement. You can be trafficked in your own home. Is one of the worst ones is probably when parents traffic their children, and we have seen that before. We usually, as TABC, don't take the lead on those investigations because it rarely has a nexus to the alcoholic beverage industry. But we have seen where you have a drug addict parent who sells their child out of their own home, and that is human trafficking, and that child was never moved, but that would also be human trafficking. Next slide, please. All demographics, I think I talked about that, genders, age, socioeconomical status, race, ethnicity, it doesn't care. We see a majority of female Hispanics, or Central American because of the industry that we regulate and the fact that we're in Texas, but we have seen, the girl that was trafficked out of North Texas, she was, white. There we've seen, African Americans, we've seen, but the males, but the majority usually are Hispanic females, but I think that's because of the industry that we regulate. A wide variety of venues, as we talked about, residences, just talked about how that can happen. Truck stops. I used to be a regular cop before I came to TABC. I was out in El Paso, and we were, had the truck stops. If anybody's from El Paso out there, the Petro 76 and Loves, I think it is. And there was a lot of, I didn't, so this was back in the 90s. I I really, and this is why I think we see an increase in human trafficking is the awareness. There's a lot more awareness for this crime, because we would go down there and we would work prostitution cases, and you would hear the girls on the CB radios, or you would see the girls walking across the lot and all. And as a young rookie cop, I really just thought it was a bunch of prostitutes, and maybe some of them were, but I never took the time. Shame on me at the time. I never took the time to wonder, well, who's really making this money? Did she come here on her own, or is her trafficker, is her pimp? Is she from El Paso, or was she brought here? So this education is really what's important, is because and I'm self-critical of myself here. I know I ran across it a lot as a regular street cop in El Paso and didn't even know what it was. So getting this awareness out there is really important. Massage businesses, strip clubs, we talked about that, sexually oriented businesses, hotel, motels, a lot of those, they're doing reverse, where they call you can have it where a lot of times the John is already at the motel calling a girl, or sometimes the pimp and trafficker and his girls will be there, and then they rent multiple rooms. So we've seen both of those. Labor trafficking, it can be domestic homes, maids, working for nothing, small businesses, hospitality industry, etc. Next slide, please. So traffickers treat others like objects. I think pretty much explained that. Traffickers could be anyone, family members, we talked about that, parents, domestic partners, we've seen that, friends, strangers. Social media is huge nowadays. So if as you're running your business, if you have employees or whatever, and they're heavy into social media, just be aware that that's probably one of the most frequent areas that we find a lot of the trafficking is occurring, whether it's the Johns looking for the girls, or the girls posting. And usually it's not the girl posting, usually it's their pimp or their trafficker posting, but it's going to look like it's the girl because it's going to be her picture. You're probably communicating with the pimp, setting up the deal. It might be her, but a lot of times it's the trafficker behind the scenes. Common behaviors, well, it says verbally or physically abusive. Yes, absolutely, they can be. But a lot of times they start off, if you see them in public, that won't be the first thing you see. Constantly monitoring, they treat them like that's their possession. We see that when we go into some of these clubs where you don't even have to tell them, they just line up, and there's usually they call them a bottom girl, who has been in the game a long time, and she usually controls all of the other girls. We had a case a few years back where we actually we were working with Travis County Sheriff's Department, and we we voluntarily, we went to a bar here in Austin. Several of the Fichettas agreed to go to an NGO and be interviewed. Just wait, you want a blanket, you want some water, you want some food. We think you might be a victim. Will you come with us? And they all volunteered. So since it was voluntary, we did not take up their cell phones. What we didn't realize was the bottom girl was with them, and the whole time she was texting the trafficker, who showed up at the NGO shortly after there, and really messed up our investigation. So you have to be careful a lot of times. And the bottom girls, they're victims too, but they've just kind of graduated to a point. I use the word graduated sarcastically, but they call them bottom, which you would think would be the opposite, but really they're the boss. right below the trafficker. And it's really hard sometimes to tell who that person is. Usually they get treated a little better, maybe they get paid a little better. Sometimes they've aged out, they're not as useful for prostitution or whatever. They're doing more of the drug sales, but be careful with that. If you think you got a victim, you might be talking to the bottom girl. Overly concerned, we see a ton of surveillance cameras in some of these clubs that nowadays, obviously, you know, you can get Ring cameras really cheap and they're really good. But sometimes you see these clubs and they don't have running water, but they got a heck of a surveillance system. So that's a clue that we look for. Next slide. Not allowed to speak for themselves, more identifying techniques, restricted, controlled communication. They don't have their own money. Um, Transported to and from location, go back to that case I was talking about here in Austin. That's what we were looking for, see if these girls were being controlled. And we have seen that where there'll be the bouncer will go pick them up and then take them to the club. We see that quite a bit, actually. Sometimes it's just as simple as they don't have a driver's license and they're being taken there. Other times it's to make sure they show up on time and they leave when their shift is done. So there is an element of control in doing that. The fearful, anxious, depressed, overly submissive, obviously. Some of these are just good. You'll know it. Something, when you see it, you're going to go, something isn't right there. And, you know, it's a weird feeling, but you'll know it when you see it. Next slide, please. More identifying victims. They lack awareness of location. We've had them before where we've interviewed them in McAllen and they thought they were in, you know, Houston. So they didn't even know where they were at. Dressed inappropriately for the venue, poor hygiene, fatigue. They're sleeping because they've been working two jobs. Like I said, we see that pretty consistently, where they will work a day job and then they will work, you know, until the bar closes at 2, 3 in the morning, and then they'll sleep a few hours and they're back at their day job, which might be cleaning or construction, or the ones we looked at here, they were doing a lot of painting of houses or apartments that were under construction. So the construction was done and then they were going in doing a lot of the painting and things of that nature. Verbal abuse, if you're in there, like if you go into a club and the girl doesn't she doesn't do the drink solicitation for whatever reason, it's not going to take long for somebody to come over and either tell that girl to go somewhere else, or you're gonna see the verbal abuse or some type of something's going to happen where that girl's going to be taken away if she's not doing the drink solicitation or basically making money. Signs of physical abuse, restraint, torture. Oh, we see that every once in a while. I think the next slide, but is branded. We'll see more. A lot of the traffickers that are doing the prostitution really like to brand their women. And next slide, please. I think it's the next slide. So yeah, here it is. So these are not specifically from any of our cases, but they're good examples. The crown, for whatever reason, they like the crown. This isn't a gang class or anything, but if it's a 5-point crown or a 6-point crown, it can mean People Nation or Folk Nation, which basically goes all the way back to the Bloods and Crips. But there's so many different, it breaks down so they don't follow it anymore. It's very ad hoc. But I think anytime you see somebody with somebody's name tattooed on the inside of their lip, they're making that their property, and they didn't want to damage the property, so they put it in a location that's hard to see. Daddy's little B, you know, I mean, obviously that's not something that you would want tattooed on your neck like that. The one on the right wasn't one of our cases, but we did a little research, or somebody that was doing the Capricorn doing a class on branding, talked about this case, and what it was a friend of hers had been murdered by the trafficker, and they couldn't identify the body. Nobody really knew who she was, so she went in as a Jane Doe. And this girl said she just felt that she was going to die, so she put her date of birth and social security number tattooed on her. So that wasn't a branding, that was her doing it herself, so that if she gets killed, they can identify her body. So kind of a sad thing there. And I don't think we have the slide here, but it's not necessarily branding, but well, it is branding, but what we'll see a lot of too, especially in sexually oriented businesses, whether they're unlicensed, licensed, they will do the branding might be just in what they're given. It can be something that just the phone case might be Versace or a knockoff brand of that, or the way they do their nails will be done a certain way. So you will find a lot of the ways that they brand their property or their women, using not just tattoos, but also just the clothes that they wear, it'd be just Nikes or a certain type of style of clothing or shoes. So identifying some more of the operations in hotels, notice we see this a lot. Room occupancy far exceeds the limits. If you have a lot of men and women going in and out, non-guests dropping off for 30 minutes, notice activity in connection to the room, excessive foot traffic, excessive noise, asking for more towels, washcloths, things like that. You would think these would be, and they are probably pretty common sense, but they might not initially ring that bell if you're not aware of if you're not on the lookout for it. Other observable factors to notice, females on different visits with different men. So if the same girl shows up different nights of the week with the different guy, we probably got some prostitution going on. Abandoned or locked out young adults, that's kind of strange, right? Or they just being told to wait in the hallway or the lobby until they're done in the room. Obviously, multi-passenger vans on the property can just be a sign that people are being funneled or brought there as a group, which would be one of the force elements to the human trafficking. Next slide, please. Truck stops, like I said, I had some truck stops in my jurisdiction when I was a regular street cop, and that CB, that's how they do all their business. Billboards for massage parlors, see that a lot around there. Truckers flashing their headlights at women and children walking in the parking lot. Victims, you see the girls walking the parking lot, knocking on doors, soliciting business, just like they would in a club. They're going to go around and do that in the parking lot also. Next slide, please. And now, so now we have a very, we did that in, I'd say less than 45 minutes, and an idea of how it happens and how to report it, especially in the alcoholic beverage industry. But we have an idea of how to identify it. Now, how do we report it? Obviously 911, if you see it and you think it's an emergency, 911 is a good option. If it's not an emergency and you just got this hunch, iWatch is run by DPS. They do a fantastic job of maintaining the data, triaging it, analyzing it, and putting it where it needs to be. If they get a report that has to do with a bar or something that's in the alcoholic beverage industry, we have good relationships with DPS. They will contact us and put us on that, and whether we take lead on the investigation or their CID team takes lead and we just assist, it's going to determine on the case. But if iWatch is probably the best way. Down at the bottom, you have the Polaris line, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Polaris has been around for years. Fantastic organization. They put on fantastic training. They do fantastic work. The reason why I like iWatch, I shouldn't say I like it better, but iWatch is more local because it's run by Texas, right? DPS. And Polaris does more national statistics. And they're not going to have Polaris. Yes, they might have the phone number for TABC at a high level, but somebody at iWatch probably has my personal cell number. So iWatch is going to get a quicker result than Polaris, and Polaris does more national or even international statistic gathering. So great organization. I'm not saying don't report to them; they're great, but iWatch is probably the best way. You can always report directly to us through our AIM system. There's a screenshot there of our new webpage, the AIM Alcohol Industry Management System. File a complaint. By all means, that will get it really quick too. So you're just going to have, it's going to be strictly to TABC, but we will work with our task force partners, DPS, FBI, whoever we need to also. Next slide, please. And stay connected. This is how you can connect with us. All of it is on TABC at texas.gov or .texas.gov. Contact us. We can come out and do presentations. I like to talk a lot, as you can tell. You can file a complaint through our AIM system. We have just a lot of resources. We're on Twitter. or whatever it's called now, Facebook, YouTube, contact us. We are here to help you. Uh, we are here to be a resource to the industry and help you, be successful in your daily job. So that concludes my portion. Maybe we have some questions. I'll turn it over to Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Chief. I'm going to go back to this slide and really just encourage everyone to take a screenshot or write these numbers down. I just want to say a couple things. One, that was very difficult to hear and see, and made me really appreciate all that our law enforcement officers do and have to see and learn about on a daily basis. So thank you, Chief, for all that you do and your many years of service. And I would just really encourage everyone. Again, I know that was really hard to listen to, but I think it's important that we know that this is going on. I think the number was 300,000 victims, we believe, are in Texas. That is a huge, very scary number. I want to reiterate what the chief said, which is, we know everyone on this call is doing the right things and is not engaging in anything like this in their business. But I think the more people that know what to look for and know how to report things, not just in alcohol businesses, but when you are traveling, and getting gas or going to a hotel or just out and about in our daily lives, to know what to look for. And then, Chief, I would just love your thoughts on, I was really struck by what you were saying about so often victims don't even know they're victims, right? And it's a crime that can be hard to identify. So when I hear that, I think if you have any doubt, see something, say something, right? There's all these ways to report anonymously. You're not going to get in trouble if you're wrong. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, just in terms of, for those of us who aren't experts, who don't always know for sure what we're seeing, should we still report? Should we still take action in some way?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Because I've been, a cop for 30 years this year, and this is by far the hardest crime to, identify or to put your finger on. Most of the crime, even if it's homicide, well, you're dealing with, unfortunately, a dead body, and you can prove or disprove, what happened. This is so subjective to the victim, the trafficker, the different elements. When we just sentenced Rita, the victims were able to give victim impact statements. That was probably one of the most heart-wrenching things that I've had to sit through, was listening to them talk about the things that Rita did. One of the girls couldn't go to work. So because she had to take care of her, I think the boy was 3 years old at the time. So Rita said, I'll watch your kid while you you go work your shift. I'll watch your kid. When she got off her shift, Rita had sent that 3-year-old baby to Mexico. We just, out of that case, part of the son's plea deal was to get that kid back. The kid's now 10, I believe. We were able to get that with the help of FBI attachés in Mexico and all. But that's how evil of a person they are. But it was, and that's that fraud or coercion that they're using on these victims, is that they're hanging it over them. Imagine going to work and you thought you left your kid, and you come back and your kid's in Mexico, and you're now, talk about indebted servitude. You're going to work for Rita forever because you want to get your kid back. And it's a horrific crime. But if we approach her and we ask her, are you a victim? What's she really going to say? Because she's worried about her kid now. She's probably going to say Rita's the greatest thing there ever was, because all she wants to do is get her kid back. So when I use the word uncooperative loosely, because I don't think they want to be uncooperative. It's the fear of law enforcement, the lies that they've been told by their trafficker, and they don't understand really what the law is, because in their country, this is probably normal. Or if there are domestic victims and they're runaways, or escaping an abusive relationship or something like that, they don't want to go back to that. And what they had, it's all relative. So what they're in now is might be better than what they left. So it's a very, very difficult crime to prove, but it's not hard to identify. And if we start reporting it more, that's where you go back to that. Once we started putting a focus on it, we saw our reports and our investigations go up, because more people were reporting it. And that's really what we're looking for.
Right. And then what about if someone does report something and they're wrong? Is there any assurance you can provide us in terms of better to, in my mind, better to report, and because God forbid something horrible is happening and no one's reporting it.
There,
And if
there's no crime in reporting. I'm wrong all the time. As long as you don't go, you think something's going, now you go kick in their door and you're wrong,
right,
then there might be some
let the
repercussions there, right?
experts handle it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Report it to
But
law enforcement, let the experts handle it.
let us go kick in the door and us be wrong. And then, and that happens sometimes, whether we've done search warrants before and what we were looking for wasn't there. And as long as we had the probable cause and we were just in what we were doing, we're going to be okay from a law enforcement perspective. From a civilian perspective, if you see something that doesn't seem right, report it. As long as you don't do anything overt to take action, you see a woman carrying a baby and you go, I don't think that's her baby, and you go grab the baby and run off. Yeah, that's going to be a problem there. But if you report that and go, something doesn't seem right about that, and you call law enforcement and they go investigate it, it's going to be perfectly fine. You're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, and that is fine. There's no crime there.
Well, and sometimes even if there's not a crime happening, there might be a situation where a social worker can step in and provide parenting resources or something like that, where no one's in trouble because maybe a crime wasn't committed, but they can still get connected with resources in the community, right?
Yes, ma'am. We do a lot with Health and Human Services, the Child Protective Services. We work closely with them. We also work closely with Department of Labor. A lot of times this wasn't, they were just, is it trafficking? It's more like labor trafficking, and they weren't paid a fair wage. So we'll work with Department of Labor to recoup those salaries that should have been paid. CPS, if we think there might just be child neglect, it might not be abuse or trafficking, but it might be child neglect. CPS can get involved. We in fact, on Rita's case, her son, it was just horrible living conditions where her son and children were at, and we called CPS on that and said, hey, we're doing something completely different over here on the HT side, but somebody's got to go. Those kids, it was just probably the worst living conditions I've ever seen. So we did get CPS out there to help us.
Absolutely. And then a couple of questions about hospitality students, hospitality employees. So a couple questions. One, are there any required trainings for employees in the hospitality industry, hotels, restaurants, that kind of thing? Anything that's required?
Yes, and I'm not the expert on this. It was last session. The hotel hospitality industry, HHSC, is putting on some mandatory training.
Okay.
I don't want to say too much because I probably got it wrong. It's not my wheelhouse, but yes, the hotel and hospitality industry, there was some required training that came out it was for hotels specifically, hotels, motels. I forget what the occupancy was. They had to have so many rooms that they rented out for a certain amount of time and to meet the criteria. But so there is some training out there through HHSC though.
Got it. We'll look into that too and share some resources. And then regardless of sort of what's required, any thoughts on training resources or information that can be provided to employees to help make them feel more comfortable recognizing and reporting potential trafficking?
I encourage you to call us. Like I said, if I can't do it myself, which I can't always, we have agents throughout the state. We have agents that are in our special investigations unit, which really are subject matter experts that can put on this class or something similar. We want to be part of the solution by providing the training up front, so that you don't end up like, I didn't know that was a victim or whatever. If we can, kind of like how we do our manager awareness program, I forget what it's called now, for sale to minors and sale to intoxicated people. We give them their TABC certification to help them identify minors. We have some programs that can help them with the human trafficking side of it too. So that's available, and we can get agents out there to present those courses.
Great. And don't forget, everyone, this presentation is recorded too, so you can certainly share this. And I would encourage you, I know many of you on this call have a weekly or monthly meeting with your managers. Just make this a topic in that meeting. You don't have to be an expert to do your part. I think that's a key takeaway from this. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know for certainty something's going on to really step in and save people's lives. One other question we got here, Chief, is do victims of human trafficking who are undocumented have rights and protections, to keep them from being deported? I know
Yes.
that's a concern we hear sometimes.
Yes, they do. We work closely with Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security. We can get a continued presence, and then we can get T or U visas. T visa is a trafficking visa. It's a little harder because we have to prove that they're a victim of trafficking. And the U visa is if they become cooperative. So a T visa is we've proven that they're a victim of human trafficking, so we can get them a visa to stay in the United States as long as they're willing to testify against the trafficker. The U visa is pretty much any crime that was committed against them while they were here undocumented, and they're going to testify against the trafficker or the criminal organization. So there are recourses to help them and to ensure that they aren't deported while the now once the case is fully adjudicated, that's a legal process that we don't
Sure.
really get too involved in. But during the investigation, absolutely, we try to get them. And I know they're looked upon favorably with their immigration status if they were victimized and then cooperative. So there is a benefit to them. We explain that to them. We don't. I'm very careful not to dangle that out there as a carrot. Like, hey, if you tell us you're a victim, we can get you status. No, because that will get us in trouble, and that's not. We probably have a lot more people. I'm a victim. I'm a victim. We don't want that. We want legitimate victims, so we don't advertise the fact that we have that continued presence capability, but it is there. And in the 10 years we've been running our special investigations unit, I think we've done it like 4 or 5 times. So it's not as frequent. It's going to be on big cases.
Sure. And I'll add, I know there are a lot of great nonprofits out there that do work in this space.
That's what we usually do is we refer them to those NGOs, Refugee Services of Texas. There's a great one down in McAllen, and I can't think of the name. They have done fantastic work they provide lawyers, immigration lawyers, to help them on not on the law enforcement side, but on the civilian side, and offer them, help them with housing and just resources and attorneys. There are a lot of resources that are out there that we can put them in touch with. We just don't do it directly.
We just got one more question that's a good one, so I do want to pose it to you really fast. What about protecting victims who were also accused of breaking laws? For example, prostitution or drinking underage or those kinds of offenses. What's in place to protect those victims?
I probably should have talked about this or had it added to the slide or something, but there's many things. And whenever you're taking a victim-centric approach, you do not treat the victims as an offender. They might be prostitutes. They might be selling drugs, but if they did it under duress, they have a defense. I am not a fan of arresting victims. And I have put that out that we are going to err on the side of caution. I don't care if you bought street level amounts, and unless they got a kilo of cocaine or something on the table, if they're selling the street level amounts out of these bars and they're doing it under duress to pay off a coyote fee or because their traffickers telling them to or forcing them to, we are not going to charge that person. I've seen a lot of law enforcement where they will charge them and then try and flip them, make them a CI. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not saying that it's not a tool that law enforcement can use. I personally am not a fan of it. What I'm a fan of is victim-centric approach. You treat them like victims until you can prove that they're not a victim. And once you prove that it is the bottom girl or whatever, then okay, then maybe charges are filed. But you get no benefit in throwing these victims in jail for crimes that they committed while they were victims. It serves no purpose to anything, to the criminal justice system, to the jails, to the courts, to them. And all it does is it creates more distrust and hate on law enforcement.
Right.
So I'm a huge fan of victim-centric approach. Harris County has a really good program. It's called 180 or something like that, where it is, though, they don't necessarily, I don't know if they actually get arrested, but they enter a program. I think they avoid the whole arrest program, but they get the arrest procedure, but they get put into this program. And if they cooperate and all that, there are no criminal charges handled. I don't know all the details, but Harris County has a really good program for making sure that we're not arresting victims.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you again, Chief. This was really informative, and just thank you again for all of your service. Thank you to TABC for being such a terrific partner. And thank you for everyone who's listening today. If you're not a member of the TRA, really encourage you to join. We do a lot of education on lots of different topics, like this webinar. We've also got a whole suite of benefits that save you money. And then, of course, we advocate for you at the local, state, and federal level. Again, we recorded this, so if you need a copy of the presentation, just send us a note. And just, again, thank you for being part of this really important conversation as we build awareness during Human Trafficking Prevention Month. So with that, we'll sign off, and thank you so much.
Thank you.